in Iraq, General David Petraeus, has recommended a suspension of troop withdrawals from Iraq after July to protect what he calls gains of the so-called surge. Petraeus testified before two Senate committees on Tuesday alongside Ambassador Ryan Crocker. He told lawmakers the security situation in Iraq has improved since last year's buildup of troops, but emphasized the gains are fragile and reversible.
As in September, my recommendations are informed by operational and strategic considerations. The operational considerations include recognition that the military surge has achieved progress, but that progress is reversible. Iraqi security forces have strengthened their capabilities, but still must grow further. The provincial elections in the fall, refugee returns, detainee releases, and efforts to resolve provincial boundary disputes and Article 140 issues will be very challenging. The transition of Sons of Iraq into the Iraqi security forces or other pursuits will require time and careful monitoring. Withdrawing too many forces too quickly could jeopardize the progress of the past year, and performing the necessary tasks in Iraq will require sizable conventional forces as well as special operations forces and advisor teams. The strategic considerations include recognition that the strain on the U.S. military, especially on its ground forces, has been considerable. A number of the security challenges inside Iraq are also related to significant regional and global threats. A failed state in Iraq would pose serious consequences for the greater fight against al-Qaeda, for regional stability, for the already existing humanitarian crisis in Iraq, and for the efforts to counter malign Iranian influence. After weighing these factors, I recommended to my chain of command that we continue the drawdown of the surge combat forces, and that upon the withdrawal of the last surge brigade combat team in July, we undertake a 45-day period of consolidation and evaluation. At the end of that period, we will commence a process of assessment to examine the conditions on the ground and, over time, determine when we can make recommendations for further reductions. This process will be continuous, with recommendations for further reductions made as conditions permit. This approach does not allow establishment of a set withdrawal timetable. However, it does provide the flexibility those of us on the ground need to preserve the still fragile security gains our troopers have fought so hard and sacrificed so much to achieve.
General Petraeus, in his opening statement before the Senate Armed Services Committee, his recommendation would leave just under 140,000 American troops in Iraq well into the fall. That's more troops deployed in Iraq than before the so-called surge. At the hearing, Senator John McCain, the presumptive Republican presidential nominee, and both Democratic presidential candidates, Senators Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, had a chance to question Petraeus and Ambassador Crocker. McCain was the first of the three to speak. In his opening statement, he said that calls for a rapid withdrawal are reckless and irresponsible. As he spoke, he was interrupted by a protester who stood up holding a banner with words, "There's no military solution."
Should the United States instead choose to withdraw from Iraq before adequate security is established, we will exchange for this victory a defeat that is terrible and long-lasting. Al-Qaeda in Iraq would proclaim victory and increase its efforts to provoke sectarian tensions, pushing for a full-scale civil war that could descend into genocide and destabilize the Middle East. Iraq would become a failed state. It could become a haven for terrorists to train and plan their operations. Iranian influence would increase substantially in Iraq and encourage other countries to seek accommodation with Tehran at the expense of our interests. An American failure would almost certainly require us to return to Iraq or draw us into a wider and far, far costlier war. If, on the other hand, we and the Iraqis are able to build on the opportunity provided by recent successes, we have the chance to leave in Iraq a force for stability and freedom, not conflict and chaos. In doing so, we will ensure...
We're going to ask you, please, to sit down. No more demonstrations, or if there is another one, we're going to have to ask our Capitol Police to remove any demonstrations.
I have had this experience previously, Mr. Chairman. If, on the other hand, we and the Iraqis are able to build on the opportunity provided by recent successes, we have the chance to leave in Iraq a force for stability and freedom, not conflict and chaos. In doing so, we will ensure that the terrible price we have paid in the war, a price that has made all of us sick at heart, has not been paid in vain.
Republican presidential candidate Senator John McCain, Carl Levin, the chair of the Armed Services Committee, was the first of the day to question General David Petraeus. During their exchange, another protester stood up and shouted, "Bring them home," before being evicted by security. This is General Petraeus defending his call for a suspension of troop withdrawals.
So what I stated was a 45-day period for consolidation and evaluation as to examine the situation on the ground, do the battlefield geometry, consult with Ambassador Crocker on what might be called the political military calculus, and then conduct the assessments. And when the assessment is at a point that the conditions are met to recommend reduction of forces, then that's what we would do. So the bottom line, sir, is that it's this period after which we do the assessments, and as the conditions are met for further reductions, then we make those recommendations.
Now, if do you have any estimate at all as to how long that second period is going to take? Are you giving us any idea as to how long that will take? You say over time.
Sir,
could that be a month? Could that be 2 months?
Sir, it could be less than that. Could it
be more than that?
It could be more than that. Again, it's when the conditions are met that we can make a recommendation for further reductions.
Could it be 3 months?
Sir, again, at the end of the period of consolidation and evaluation, it could be right then, or it could be longer. Again, it is when.
Can you? If you could please, we're asking the audience. If you could bring the gentleman out. I'm afraid we're going to have to ask him to leave. Bring them home! General. Bring them home! Bring them home! General, we're going to ask you this question again. Could it be as long as 3 months?
Sir, it could be.
Okay, that's all I'm asking.
It is when the conditions are met.
I understand, but I'm just asking you a direct question. Could that be as long as 3 months?
It could be, sir.
Could it be as long as 4 months?
Sir, it is when the conditions are met. Again.
Now, next question. If all goes well, what would be the approximate number of our troops there at the end of the year? Let's assume conditions permitted things to move quickly. What, in your estimate, would be the approximate number of American troops there at the end of the year? Can you give us just say if you can't give us an estimate?
All right, sir, I can't give you an estimate.
You're not going to give us an estimate on that.
Later in the day, it was Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton's turn to be in the spotlight. She began by calling for an orderly process of withdrawal from Iraq.
The administration and supporters of the administration's policy often talk about the cost of leaving Iraq, yet ignore the greater costs of continuing the same failed policy. You know, the lack of political progress over the last 6 months and the recent conflict in Basra reflect how tenuous the situation in Iraq really is. And for the past 5 years, we have continually heard from the administration that things are getting better, that we're about to turn a corner, that there is finally a resolution in sight. Yet each time, Iraqi leaders fail to deliver. I think it's time to begin an orderly process of withdrawing our troops, start rebuilding our military, and focusing on the challenges posed by Afghanistan, the global terrorist groups, and other problems that confront America.
Clinton went on to question General Petraeus and Ambassador Ryan Crocker. She pressed Crocker on the continued authority of U.S. troops to conduct military operations in Iraq.
With respect to our long-term challenges, Ambassador Crocker, the administration has announced that it will negotiate an agreement with the government of Iraq by the end of July that would provide the legal authorities for U.S. troops to continue to conduct operations in Iraq. Let me ask you, do you anticipate that the Iraqi government would submit such an agreement to the Iraqi parliament for ratification?
The Iraqi government has indicated it will bring the agreement to the Council of Representatives At this point, it is not clear, at least to me, whether that will be for a formal vote or whether they will repeat the process they used in November with the Declaration of Principles, in which it was simply read to the members of the Parliament.
Does the administration plan to submit this agreement to our Congress?
At this point, Senator, we do not anticipate that the agreements will have within them any elements that would require the advice and consent procedure. We intend to negotiate this as an executive agreement.
Well, Ambassador Crocker, it seems odd, I think, to Americans who are being asked to commit for an indefinite period of time the lives of our young men and women in uniform